Three, two, one. Hi, this is Zach. I'm with the Idiosyncratic podcast, where I interview the most interesting people I can find on the internet. Today, I am with Deloria Blackwolf. He goes by the handle DataraAD. You can find him on Instagram. He is a writer, artist, and musician. And basically, I've been following his story for about a couple years. He is a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe in South Dakota. Yeah, Sean, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. How about you?
Doing pretty good. And before we get into it, I noticed that you're a big metal fan. Is that correct?
I used to be. I've definitely mellowed out over the last 5 years or so. But for a time there, I liked it, yeah.
Okay.
It's the baseline of my personality. But I think a lot of people would be interested to find that I'm probably listening to pop music while I make my artwork. And my artwork's pretty metal themed. But yeah, not so much metal these days.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I kind of assumed, just looking at your art, I was thinking like this needs to be on some sort of metal cover.
Yeah, I've been getting that. I get that a lot, but my latest clients are pop. Like I got a pop lady out in Canada. She's just now getting on the charts, so I'm excited to see where that goes. And then the latest few have been trap. So that's interesting. That's not the juxtaposition that I was expecting.
No, I totally get that.
But definitely a lot of metal bands too.
For sure. Who are some pop artists?
Oh, dude, it's not so much specific artists. Like I'm more into just specific songs. Because like with pop music, depending on the producer, the songs are either going to be dope or they're going to be garbage. And a lot of it is garbage. So yeah, I just, sometimes I pick specific days and just try to find new stuff. And, you know, Spotify's been pretty great with that, with music discovery. But specific acts, man, that's it's not so much. I guess Charlie XCX, that Pop 2 album was pretty fucking dope. That is a spaced out, weird, avant-garde, but still catchy album. Definitely not like top 10 or anything, but I dig the hell out of that.
Do you like Lorde when she was big?
You know, I like one specific song.
Yeah.
Which one is that? Actually, there's a couple of, I don't mind Lorde at all. I haven't did like a deep dive in her discography or anything like that. But yeah, I don't mind her at all.
For sure. There's definitely
Carly
good
Rae
pop.
Jepsen's one.
Carly, I like
Emotion
her
was
stuff
a dope
too.
album.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is. Emotion and Side B and his latest one, Dedicated. Like those are just solid albums. Like it's difficult finding that level of musicianship when it comes to pop music. Because, you know, like pop music is kind of like rap. You know, rap has a very short shelf life. It seems like you have to try to find dope stuff, and it's kind of really trendy. And once it goes, it's gone. So finding stuff that sticks around or has the potential to is just, it's difficult. You know, with metal, you like one thing. It's going to be the first album, and it was probably released in 91, and it probably sounds like shit now, but everyone's going to love it till the end of time. With pop, it's a lot more tricky.
Who do you listen to in trap? I listen to some like XXX.
I'm pushing 30, man. It's I don't know any of this stuff, man. I really don't know. It's just not my genre personally.
Okay.
Like I've been into this genre called scrams. It's sort of like black metal, but it's whiny, melodramatic, miserable stuff. But it's essentially black metal, just with a different type of musician. It's difficult describing, man. It's basically what emo used to be before it became, you know, the shit from my childhood. And it's just abrasive. Like it's hardcore punk, a lot of screaming, a lot of clean guitars too, which I really dig. Like it's weird hearing clean, aggressive with just shouting and harsh vocals. I've been digging a lot of that stuff lately. But yet again, it's like the pop thing. You know, I'm searching for shit I like, but yeah, I'm not big into specific artists or anything like that. It's more like an ambiance or a mood type of a thing.
Okay. And this is what you're listening to while you're painting, for example?
Well, with painting, a lot of podcasts, man. A
Yeah.
lot of podcasts. Most of the time, it's probably more podcast than music, but a good time of it is music. You know, lectures, big into lectures while I paint. Lectures, talks, because I have a very tough time concentrating on stuff. If I want to learn, I have to learn it through audio medium. So you know, when I paint, it's a good time to keep my body busy and kind of open up my head so I can actually pay attention. That's just the way it's always been. Like when I was young, in school, I would always draw when I was learning. Like they're just hand in hand. I don't know why it's that way. I'm sure I'm sure if I was big into head doctors, we'd find out I have some sort of attention deficit disorder. I'd imagine, but yeah, I'm not really too interested in finding that out.
So I'm creating a YouTube video. The plan is to display some of your artwork while we talk. It's very heavy. You had this quote in that paper that you sent me. I always dug holding down the low end. When I see your art, the fact that you play bass, it definitely fits because your art is just such a kind of heavy sort of hitting piece, I guess. What is your artistic process? I noticed that you use a lot of finger painting. It's very, I don't want to say chaotic, but there's definitely sort of an atmosphere to your art. Do you have any sort of mindset going into a new piece?
Well, the mindset is to get something done. That's primarily what it is. I do this every day. And to get any sort of traction on social media, you have to be creating content. That's just what it is. There are artists who are far more qualified and more interesting than myself. And I'm finally catching up to them, but it's because they put out really great pieces of art. It's just they do it infrequently. So for me to catch up to them, I have to go for quantity over quality. But there is quality control. I'm not making stuff that looks terrible. It's just, I have to put something down. And for me, it's an art therapy thing. It's like unconscious art therapy is the best way to put it. If I don't paint, I'm going to have a rough time. If I don't draw or paint, I'm going to feel terrible. And it's just a matter of time. I could probably go 3-4 days, but if I go too long, I'm going to start feeling it in my bones, in my muscles. There's going to be an unnerving feeling. So for me, when it comes to art, it's always just get something down and get it out of my system. But I would say the more symbolic stuff, the more intricate stuff, almost always that's going to be on a bigger canvas. And it's going to take probably months to do, but not consciously. I'll paint something on the canvas and then let it rest. And whenever I run out of canvas or when I'm bored or something, I'll look through my stuff and see what isn't up to my standards, and we'll just go at it again and again until it's there. The more weighty, interesting stuff, it's always the end product of at least 7 months, but those are rare. The process itself, though, I've been slowly developing this over the last 4 years. And it started with finger painting. And what I would do is I would put different colors of paint on different fingers, and I would just put them down and get the canvas all covered. And I slowly brought that over into my drawing process as well. My drawing process is all scribbles. It has to start with the scribbles. It has to start with visual noise. Then that way I can slowly bring out the stuff that my brain is seeing, that my eyes are seeing. I can't make something from nothing. People who can sit down on a blank sheet of paper and just make something, I'm envious of that. My stuff is I do something every day, but it's a time consuming process. It also has a lot to do with my eyesight. My eyesight isn't good. That little paper I wrote, I mentioned I got my ass kicked a few years back, and this dude just fucked my eye up. He popped all the vessels. It gave me a concussion, and my right eye hasn't been good for a long time now. I used to hunt. I used to be a pretty good archer. I used to shoot rifles. I can't do that anymore. There's no detail in my right eye anymore. It's not so bad, but it's pretty goddamn bad. And that could be it could be a bad thing, but for the artwork, it works wonderfully.
Yeah, I feel you sell yourself a bit short when you say that your stuff isn't necessarily as has level quality as other people. Because for me, your stuff is just super hard hitting. For me, it's impactful. So I'm consistently impressed with your stuff. Go on your page, and it seems like every day there's a new thing. I'm just like, holy crap, this is awesome.
For me, my standard for dope dark art is Zizla Biskinski, and Zizla is just he's any artist who's into my genre, they're going to be influenced by this guy. He left a body of work that's just awe-inspiring, and a lot of the artists that I look up to personally, they're kind of on that level. Very detailed oriented, and the deficiencies in my style that I know are there, I haven't developed them properly. I didn't go to school for this stuff, so it is chaotic and it's very much in the moment. But there's a style that I wish I could get towards, the use of perspective, more landscapes. I've been trying to work that in my stuff, but it's just a blind spot in my work. So I am selling myself short, but I understand that what I do does look great. It's just, for me, there's another level that I wish I was at. I think the difference between the stuff that influences me and my stuff is really the difference between, say, technical death metal technical death metal, and what I'm doing would be something like punk rock or grunge or something, 4 chords, aggressive, angsty. compared to something that a real musician can make. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, and I'll post some of, I can't even pronounce it, but I know who you're talking about. I'll have to figure out how to spell it. Yeah, he had a pretty tragic story. I think he ended up getting killed by like his stepson or something. Yeah, his stuff is great.
Yeah, something like that, over money.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I'll post it just so people know for reference who we're talking about. Okay, yeah, that's understandable. Like he's, like you said, he's a technical master when it comes to painting. So I guess going back to, the violence that you had experienced to your eye, I got into your story because in part I was really impressed. It seemed like you had kind of overcame a lot in your life to get to where you are now. So I guess if you just want to kind of talk about your background a little bit growing up, and then maybe going into sort of how you got into Jungian psychology and your journey with that.
All right, so I'll preface this with a dream just to keep it Jungian. And the dream was of myself, and I'm placed between two poles, and the poles are connected by a wire. And then the voice in the dream says, "Pray to the center." And I fucked up. I couldn't pray to the center. So after that, I'm shown this tree. This man, if I could paint a tree like this, man, I think it'd be my masterpiece, man. It was a demonic tree. And it wasn't just a demonic tree. Like there were moving faces in the bark. This thing was black, scarred all the way up through it. And then I saw my granddad show up, and he was carrying a staff. And he hit the bow of the tree with it. And when he hit it, he was engulfed in this green light. And he got sucked into the tree. And then I could see his face appear in the wood itself. So the basic idea that I've been able to pull out of this image was that the dream was telling me to live in moderation and pray to the center. I couldn't pray to the center. I was living a very destructive life up to that point, and for a while there after too. But the dream picked a very specific character to represent. I think the dream was nihilistic in its outcome because it was my granddad, but he also got sucked into it and became a part of the tree. But the basic point is that the family tree's all fucked. Everyone in my family's we're in a rough spot. It was worse when I was younger. It was way worse when I was younger. And most of my childhood is just like a collection of things that went bad while everyone was drinking, and that should be. I think that should be not a frequent occurrence. But for me, that was every weekend or every payday weekend. So it happened a lot. It just wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. We grew up, same neighborhood. We've been here my whole life. My family got this house when my mom was pregnant. So we've been here 30 years. They're about 28, whatever. And it was like a meeting of two families. It was my mom's family, my dad's family, and they both lived down here. And it was an extended family on both sides. So there was uncles and aunts on both sides, and then uncles and aunts and cousins, and it was a lot of people. And the tree's been pruned the further along we get. People just keep dying. This year we lost 3 people in the span of 2 months. My grandma passed away, and then my uncle, my grandma's youngest, he died from diabetes. He just didn't take care of himself once grandma was gone. And then the same night my uncle died, probably 2 hours before that, my other uncle, he decided that he didn't want to live no more. So he took his car, went 80, 90 miles down the highway, just rolled, got ejected from the thing, and the car burned up. That was all in 2 months. And then my uncle died of heart failure just shortly after. It's and just looking back, man, from 2010 up until now, it's just been people dying just every fucking year. They talk about life expectancy on the tribes as being 50 years old, 60 years old for men, and that's absolutely true. There's a lot of people passing away, but people live hard out here, and it's unnecessary in my opinion. Now that I'm sober, I've been sober now for 3 years, 4 years, and life doesn't have to be as terrible as these people are making it. But when you get caught up in it, it just it overwhelms everything. It's a very monotonous place to grow up, and so people, they compensate for that with substance abuse, and it's just it just creates a cycle. So my grandma, she raised something like, I don't even know, maybe 12 people, 12 of my cousins, and above them were the uncles, and there was a lot of uncles and a lot of aunts too, and they all had kids, and my grandma got stuck with them, and most of them, they became bums. my family specifically, I had a relative who was a straight up alcoholic from age probably 11 or 12. And then my dad, he was a wicked alcoholic. My dad was my dad was a good guy. He was a good guy. It was just 3/4 of the year he was drunk, and that was all. That was its own fucking thing, man. My dad, one of my first memories of my dad was him going into a coma. Like he drank himself into a coma back in '97 or so. He drank Everclear. He would drink a pint of Everclear to himself every night. I drank Everclear shortly. Like I've had maybe a few shots of that stuff. I got blacked out on that stuff about 7 years ago, and it didn't take much, man. I mean, I'm talking 2 shots, and I blacked the fuck out. This dude was drinking this shit every fucking day, man.
Wow.
And he always had his friends over who were my uncles, and they would be drunk all the time, man. My dad was a cool guy, sure, but he was also deeply insecure. He was a very insecure guy, always worried about my mom cheating and that type of thing. My mom wasn't cheating. Like, he was just like he had his own. To explain my life, you'd have to explain my dad's life, and I don't even know what happened before his. Like it's you bring all of it with you, man. Like you're bringing everyone with you when you just live. Like my dad, he got jumped, got his ribs broken. My name, my first name, not my middle name, that came from my brother who died in a car wreck before he was like a year old. Him, my mom, and my dad, they all got in a rollover or some shit like that. So they gave me a name that sounded similar to his. And my mom, she was like eternally, like she was fucked up from that. She was scarred from that. So every payday, so every 2 weeks, I would have to deal with them fighting over it. My mom would drink, and she would just sink to a low place. And it happened like clockwork every time. She would cry. She would always cry, and then they would fight. And that was just the template. So for 15 years, I dealt with that, just these two getting into it. Then all around, these guys getting into trouble. My extended family were getting into trouble. Whether that be fighting or getting arrested or just general nonsense, man. It was pretty heavy. It was pretty heavy. It's really hard to think about my childhood. Not like it hurts to think about it, but most of it's just recollections of people getting rowdy, and I got used to that pretty quick. I carry that with me right now too. I'm not too happy with that either, but it's just a product of it. Well, it wasn't great.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, and this is a little personal, but you don't have to answer if you don't want to. What would you say is kind of your low point in all this?
My low point, yeah, that's I feel like I would say from 20 to 25 was my low point. The whole thing from there, like it's just a hodgepodge of mistakes. Because like my friend died when I was 21, and when he died, like I didn't really know how to handle that. That was new to me, and he was the last person to hang out with me. I alienated everyone in my drunken stupor, so my friend, he passed away. And when that happened, I just started drinking more than I ever did before. And I did it all the time. Whatever I could afford, I drank. I went from drinking nice liquor. I would spend $30 on a jug and then some beer, to being able to get shit-faced off $8. Like, I went from nice liquor to straight up vodka. And I screwed up a lot, man. Did a lot of dumb shit. Got in a lot of fights. I got maced, got thrown in jail, car wrecks, a lot of rough hangovers. It was, I can't really point to one specific instance, because when things went bad, it went real bad, and they happened, fairly frequently. So I would say between 21 and 25, it just wasn't good.
I see. So, when people think, Native American tribes, they don't really think Jungian thought, Jungian psychology. So it was interesting to me, because I was just getting into Jung when I found you on Reddit. And, I was reading some of your stories, and I was reading, what you had to say about, your experiences. So I guess it was just a little bit of synchronicity. So you kind of went the Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces route into Jungianism. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's exactly that.
Okay. And how'd you find that book, The Hero with a Thousand
I
Faces?
found that, well, out here, the scam is to go to tribal college long enough to get the Pell Grant. That's pretty much what everyone I knew did. And when you went longer than when the checks came, the whole place became a ghost town. Like, people only signed up to get some money, some quick cash, and then they just disappeared. I tried the art program out there, and it got lonely as soon as that money went out, man. And I did the same thing. I did that 3 or 4 times. But I was lucky in that I found Joseph Campbell's book. I don't know how I found it. I think it might have just been the cover. I can't tell you. But yeah, man, that was a wake up call. That was a real wake up call. And for me, there was a lifelong pursuit of certain questions. I think, yeah, man, I was really into shit like ancient aliens, like those type of things that make it question. Now, clearly, ancient aliens is garbage. But I would, someone has to do this. I would love to hear a Jungian analysis of ancient aliens, like the same concepts. They come up, like the mandala symbolism is everywhere in that stuff. I'm sure you could meld them fairly well, but that's just me thinking off the top of my head. But yeah, it was Hero with a Thousand Faces. It was Heroes with a Thousand Faces. And for me, the big symbols around our reservation is the medicine wheel. I've never heard a proper explanation for what the medicine wheel is. We don't really have much traditional people available to explain these things. So you just kind of have to piece them together. When I found Jungian psychology, I found the medicine wheel in explicit terms. The medicine wheel, that's the alchemical path. There's the negrito, that's the black, the albedo, the white, the citrinitas, I think that's what it's called. There's the yellow, and then you have the rubido, that's the red. I found that in everywhere, but it actually made sense once I found Jungian psychology. And around that too, for me, what was so interesting about Jungian psychology, Joseph Campbell, I guess, would be that there was a connection between all cultures that made some sense. And it was, it made more sense than dividing by race or religion or what have you, because there was a metaphorical or an allegorical meaning behind just your average dream. Dreaming that's a universal. And then with Campbell, the universal was the monomyth, and by extension, rites of passage. So that was it. Yeah, but there was no. I didn't read before I found that book, and I think one of the big reasons that I managed to sober up was because I started reading. So for me, literacy was something that I definitely needed. When I think about all the people I know, all the people I grew up with, these aren't readers. They're not people who give a shit about reading, and I think they're robbing themselves of something by not getting into it.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big things with addiction, right? Is if you don't have anything to replace it, then it's really hard to get out of something without getting into something new. And for people who don't know, when Deloria talks about the medicine wheel, one of the big concepts in Jungianism is the concept of the mandala, which basically a lot of cultures, Christian, Buddhism is a big one. They have these wheels, and they kind of represent the collective unconscious of different cultures. When Sean talks about the concept of the medicine wheel, it is very interesting that, you just see it popping up over and over and over again. I do want to talk to you a little bit about rite of passages, but first, the book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, was this kind of the beginning of your journey out of the depths that you were in, this period of your life that was kind of self-destructive?
It was the beginning. I didn't start drinking until I was 18 going on 19. I didn't find the book until that winter semester, that spring semester. So it was right in line. It was right in line with the beginning. I didn't start drinking. Yeah. And when I found that book, I think it armed me with something I really needed. And that was the basic template of what was to come. And what that said to me was to have some reverence for the dream. It starts off early in that book too, man, like really early. There's a lot of big wisdom dropped within the first 15, 20 pages that I've kept with me for a long time. But I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I asked if that was the beginning of your journey, even though, if anything, that was kind of the beginning of your descent into the depth. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it was. It really was. Yeah, man, the dreams. I never thought of anything about dreams. It's just they got so strong shortly after. And it just coincided with the substance abuse. So I think unconsciously I was trying to do something more with my life without me being able to actualize it. So I took the long way. I feel like at the bottom of addiction, I've read this somewhere from someone, probably Robert L. Moore, I'd imagine. He talks about the archetypes, and he always says the archetypes want you, and he never goes lightly on that phrase. For Robert L. Moore, an archetype is kind of like it's not necessarily benevolent, but it could be very malevolent. Like it wants you in your totality. It wants you to worship it. It wants to use you as its mouthpiece. And I've seen people taken over by that archetypal possession. A lot of the musicians that I knew, they were alive with that live fast, die young thing, and it just destroyed their lives. And they did it without having any awareness of what had caught them, and it ended up very, very destructive. Very destructive. I can think of at least 5 or 6 people just off the top of my head who fell into that trap.
And one thing you did mention in that paper was if you hadn't found Joseph Campbell, for example, you could have easily found, another book, like, for example, Marx, which would have set you on like a totally different path. Is that fair to say?
I think so. 18. That's pretty impressionable. That's an impressionable time.
Yeah, definitely. Now that we talked a bit about your descent, what was the start of the ascent to where out of, this whole milieu of intergenerational tragedy, but out of all this, all these factors going against you, how did you manage to find a way to get into art and being sober for 40 years? Was there ever like a specific moment?
I think the big one would be meeting my cousin. We didn't grow up with each other. He was just in town one time. And I was 18. Yeah. So all of this happened, the beginning of the descent and the way out, it all happened at the same time before it even started. I met my cousin. His name was, we'll call him Montez. I met Montez because I needed someone to smoke with. He was staying at my grandma's house. And for natives, grandma's not just your mom's mom or your dad's mom. In this case, it was my mom's cousin's mom. It's there's not a whole lot of specifications out here. So your grandma could be any number of people. But he was staying with my grandma, and we just started hanging out every day. And this guy, he really pissed me off. I mean, I liked being around him, and we had a common goal, which was to get stoned. But he pissed me off, man. I hated him secretly. This is the whole Cain and Abel dichotomy. He was everything that my personality lacked, and still does a lot to this day. He was very responsible, very disciplined, and very intelligent and charismatic as well. So when I met him, man, this is Jungian Psychology 101. What is it? Shadow projection. He took on my shadow without him ever knowing it. But what he also did, and this is Jungian Psychology 101, is he kind of acted as the mentor, the elder, or as a source of transference, because we spent months together. Every day we spent our time together, just bullshitting and fishing and hunting and all that stuff, and mostly in the pursuit of getting fucked up. But what he did was he challenged me. I was a very melodramatic, very nihilistic person, and then to have someone who was just the complete opposite of that. Not only the complete opposite of that, but someone who could make me think differently and make me understand that there is a bigger horizon. There's a bigger life out there that wasn't this. I've seen a number of my friends get caught where I used to be, who are still in that place. And I lucked out, I think, big time finding this person, because he really, really helped me just become a better all-around person. And I can honestly say that I haven't seen many people in my community or in my family who can even act in that role. Going back to that initial dream about seeing my grandfather putting a stop to this demonic tree, is because my grandpa was one of the few people who wasn't habitually fucked up. My grandpa wasn't a general, he wasn't a bum. My grandpa was always working on something. He was always keeping the yard in order. He was always working on vehicles. He was always cleaning fish. At nighttime, he would be reading his scripture. Those are things that I personally needed. I needed that level of discipline. I also needed to read. So seeing the dream carry someone like that and to potentially put a stop to this destructive family tree, I think that's there's an impulse in me that knew that that's what I needed to aim towards. But to realize that concretely took a long time. And for me, one of the better parts about meeting my cousin was that he introduced me to a mushroom. And for me, the mushroom was easily one of the most important experiences I ever had as a young adult. And it came by happenstance. Like a lot of this stuff is synchronicity. For me, synchronicity is one of the leading factors in my life. I've devoted myself to synchronicity, to listening to the call of these synchronous moments. And at the time, I needed to take a piss. Someone was in the bathroom, so I went outside. I live in a reservation community. There's no one around. Like, there's empty lots all around me. So I take a piss, and I'm just standing around for, couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. And I hear like a weird metal clang coming down the road, and it's my cousin. He moved probably a year and a half prior. And he just shows up out of the blue. I shake his hand, not my piss hand, and we just catch up for a little bit. And he looks at me and just a beaming smile, and he says, "Hey man, do you want to try some boomers?" And I didn't hesitate. I said, "Hell yeah, I want to." And that was it, man. And that was hands down like something I definitely needed, and something, in my opinion, is not available for most people where I'm at. That's that old Terrence McKenna thing. He says that Americans, we have alcohol, red meat, and sugar, and pain pills, and like tobacco. We don't have a visionary component to our diet, essentially. So for me, the dream was the alternate, as well as this one mutt trip, and I never would have had that without my cousin.
Wow, it's kind of interesting because like everything you say, reading the book, meeting Cousin Montez, going into the depths, to me it all kind of resembles a hero journey in of itself. Kind of a funny synchronicity in that way. But it does seem like, eventually you followed the whole cycle. You went into the depths, you returned. And so what are your plans going into the future?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's a real interesting one, because, they always talk about how the society is in a state of breakdown when the hero returns with the boon. And nowhere is that more apparent than where I'm at. It's the issue there, though, is, I'm a very selfish person. And I think what an area like this needs is something that I can't adequately give back. I think the reservations absolutely need a reform as far as rehabilitation goes. I've known plenty of people who've gone into the rehab programs, and it hasn't done anything. I feel like the rite of passage aspect is definitely needed. But to even attempt to bring that into a community in a way that's as immersive and ego destroying, I think would be, there's a lot of legislation in front of that. I had to hurt a lot. I walked, I think, 5 miles in a whiteout blizzard thinking I was going to die. I walked a solid 2 miles barefoot one night on stones as large as my fist. I overdid it on K2 back before it was crack, and I thought I was going to die. The dreams that were important to me, like they trapped me in them, and they held me close, and they made sure I saw what I needed to see in order for me to mature as a person. I also needed the presence of a mentor figure to help me reevaluate my whole worldview. I also needed the mushroom to break me down in a conscious way, not so much in the dream way. Along with all of that, I also needed to see the loss of friends and family. I need all of that in order for me to become a more mature person. So I think what the boon would have to be would be a sort of scaffolding to bring that back into culture, into this culture. I think that when we stepped forward into modernity, we kind of cut off all of that stuff from the generations prior. These type of rites of passage, whatever they may be. I think Victor Turner would be a good person to read, or Sia Iliadi, or Robert Allen Moore. Like, you read, or Joseph Campbell too. If you read how terrifying these rites were, like, there's no way you could do that in modern society. But I think what they represent are things that have to be instilled in a culture for the culture to keep thriving, or not even before thrive. It would have to die and be rebirthed. That's in Jungian psychology too. When they talk about the rebirth of the church, the idea is that Christ dies as well, and so does the church. But from that, something new is reborn. So I feel like the merging of depth psychology, of psychoanalysis with the church, as well as a rebirth of rites of passage, all of these have to happen for a place like my community, my tribe, or just natives, and like something like that has to happen, or else it will remain in a perpetual state of decay. I don't see a whole lot of ways out of it either. My uncle, before he died, he was a tribal councilman, and what his main issue was that out here, half of the people on the tribal council, they're in it for ego reasons. They're not really in it for the betterment of the communities. Another issue too is you only have 2 years to try to make any sort of policy changes. So there's not really a whole lot of moving forward just on a bureaucratic level. So the loftier ideas of what a more mythologically informed society could bring to a type of area like this, like that in itself is, it's a pipe dream. So, what I would like to bring to it was hopefully just be a little bit more push forward into these ideas, and maybe hopefully someone 20, 30, 80 years down the road could make something of that. But, my plan is just to paint and try to get the fuck out of the reservation.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I want to abandon it completely. But it's just the problems facing an area like this is just, it's a real monster. It's an unconscious evil entity. So finding a way to tackle that, I would hope that we find a sort of prophet figure who could show up and tackle these things. But that's not going to be me. But maybe we'll see that person soon. I don't know.
Yeah. It's kind of like maybe your grandpa was the seed of your own development, maybe by being that role model, maybe in a way, work that you're doing with your individuation, looking into Jungianism. Hopefully, maybe that could be sort of a seed that's needed for this eventual healing.
I think what's interesting, though, is that Jungian psychology caught on so quickly. When I was interested in this stuff 10 years ago, like no one knew about it. And it was really hard to find this material. That's one of the reasons why I record bootleg copies of these books, is because this type of material it actually is occult knowledge at the moment. But there is a growing interest in it. And there are people who are doing, in my opinion, great things with it. So I feel like the seed's already there. I'm just a little part of it. That was a dream that an analyst gave Jung. How did that go? It was a dream of these people who they're building a tower brick by brick. And Jung says that what he was involved in and what we were all involved in was the beginning of a new religion. And in Jung's estimate, it would take something like 500 years to be made.
Yeah.
I feel like, 500, that's a long time. I'm hoping it ain't 500 years. Maybe 100, preferably 50. Maybe 25 would be nice. But, to think that would take half 1,000 years, that's a rough pill to swallow.
Yeah. And regarding problems that your tribe is facing, I feel like what we see in Native American tribes across the U.S. is almost kind of a microcosm for the greater sense of nihilism that we're seeing in the rest of the U.S. I think that, kind of the trauma that you guys have experienced, kind of put you in this position, but with the death of God and people turning away from old religions, I think tragedies of despair, I think it's what it's called, the level of people dying from overdose and suicide in the larger U.S. is skyrocketing. So to me, I think that figuring out how to fix the tribal spirit might be a really important step in figuring out the larger destiny of our nation.
Yeah, politically, I don't align myself with anyone. And I feel like I don't really buy into the Marxist conception all too much. I don't fantasize about the French Revolution in U.S. soil. I don't really care about calling someone comrade. I feel that stuff's, corny. I don't hate landlords. But I feel like what people really want to see implemented on a wide scale happens on reservations right now, and they're not doing well. So, universal basic income, like that would be great. But on the reservation, not my reservation, we're very poor, but the reservations that do get something like that, man, it's almost always destructive. And even with the $1,000 a month or the $10,000 a month, it seems like the same faults happen over and over. Same results, even with money. So I feel like the reservations are a great trial run for these great social programs that I would like to see implemented. But, I think that there is a missing psychologically informed aspect that has to be addressed. And I think that would come back to the rebirth of a rite of passage as well as a living myth. I see a lot of people trying to resurrect the dismembered corpse of my ancestors' beliefs. I don't think it speaks to someone on a more primal level, so it kind of goes on deaf ears. I don't know if that's the right path to take. The reservations, they are what humans in modern times default to with how things are in 2020. Mass consumerism is a huge issue. The pacifying yourself with substance abuse, or with food, like food as a drug, food as a destructive force. Like that's out here, and that's a product of additives or whatever. Marketing, some evil marketing is going on. I saw this great article talking about how McDonald's specifically targets people of color, like Black people and Hispanics especially. Like there's a comfort food angle that these guys are exploiting, and it's wreaking enormous havoc on these populations. Like there's a mind-body disconnect, and I don't know if it's active agency of maliciousness. I don't know if there's a cabal that's trying to destroy these communities. I don't know. I personally don't. I outgrew that conspiracy-minded stuff a long time ago. But I think passively, it's absolutely being done. There's an active campaign towards the destruction of various communities. And I think education would be the backbone of it. The lack of education is a big factor in why it's not better. But paradoxically, if you educate yourself in these matters, you're not going to want to be in these communities, and you're not going to want to help improve it. You're probably going to disappear. It's like an Ouroboros. It's the tail-eating snake.
Yeah. It's kind of that old late-stage capitalism thing that a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, like I said, like I actually, I understand that stuff, but I feel like that stuff's corny,
Yeah.
I don't. I can't share those sentiments without feeling kind of dorky.
Yeah.
But there's some truths in there. It's just, I'm searching for a tribe that could speak for these things without going towards the extremes. And maybe that's what we need is a in the middle type of a path that's not, because like the conservative people I know, that they're only conservative by tradition, and they started off well. I have a friend who's very well off, probably always going to be well off, and he's known natives his entire life, and he's watched us destroy ourselves. So the sympathy just isn't there. And when you go out and you talk to these white people, they have that same sentiment. That they watched us destroy ourselves, but they have that inherited wealth as well. Like there's some truth to the whole white privilege thing. It's just when you're on that side, the whole bootstrap mentality is kind of true. But then they wouldn't have to care about us. So why would they ever break from tradition? Like Christy Nome right now, that lady does not care about South Dakota. She didn't care about South Dakota. She didn't care about what's going on with the virus. And it's very apparent. And we're probably going to vote her back in for another term. So I think class consciousness, or just being aware of how we could feasibly change things, it just doesn't exist. Like it's a very uneducated people out here.
And at the same time, you sound pretty skeptical of identity politics, intersectionality. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm an artist. I have to be. I have to be opposed to these types of things because, there's something in wisdom. I'm interested in wisdom. And, if we have a people who are just trigger happy when it comes to destroying careers, then you're going to have a lot of people who are vying for power. And when they try to get into power, that they're not going to have the wisdom that a more flawed person could bring. And when that happens, I feel like the culture itself would stagnate or worse, implode. With artwork, it's very similar, whether that's the visual arts or music or comedy or dramas or movies. We're going to deify shot products because of someone's skin color or because of their sexuality. And I feel like that's antithetical to what art is supposed to do. Artwork itself is a transformative process. And the people who wield artwork as a transforming agency, they're one in a million. They're one in a million. And the proper story that rings true with all of the archetypal beats that can point someone to a better life by instilling this type of wisdom in it. Like, how many of those stories are going to go unlistened to because of quotas, because of a diversity quota? To me, that's a shame. I don't, that's an unanswerable question, but it is an issue. On top of that too, like I'm so over Native American artists in general. Native American art is, to me, isn't doing what it should be doing. I want to see Native Americans create great artwork without them focusing on Native stuff. Like I want to see great art that's just great art. That's something that I try to do in my own way. But the people who get the most attention, that they're the ones who are becoming straight up caricatures. There's a very big Native artist from my area, and his whole career has been him playing up the character, and he's gotten very far with that. But this person, he didn't live the life. He was the son of ranchers. He went to school. He went to our school and drove past two different tribal schools. Like he said, "Fuck you, people. I'm going where the opportunities are." He didn't really grow up around like res people, and then he played up the character. And as soon as he made it a couple thousand miles away from home, that's when he became the pure Lakota. That's when he became the voice of our people. And I think an issue with the identity politics thing is you're going to get a whole swath of people who are cut from the same cloth from an education standpoint. Like if you go into the great sorting machine, you're going to be from a different class. You're not going to be from where we're from. I automatically distrust someone's analysis of why people do the things they do if they have no history with it. And then when they do speak, in my experience, they end up missing some of the more important focal points of why we're here. And then our struggle just becomes a simple phrase, systemic racism or inherited trauma or some shit like that. There's no nuance anymore, and then it just becomes its own language. And anyone who could feasibly offer any sort of criticism will not be accepted, and it's just going to be it's going to be a negative feedback loop of ideology. So I'm skeptical because of that. I'm skeptical because of the I'm just skeptical of the whole thing. And I feel like the further you go, the more pillars you break down, the more opportunity for destruction is going to be. I don't like that the issue of single mothers became a politicized issue. I don't like that because I've seen a lot of single mothers in bad families. And on the reservation, the people who grew up with fathers, they all got out. Not even good fathers, just fathers. Like that shouldn't be politicized. We shouldn't try to break down aspects of culture just because we can. I feel like there should be, it just shouldn't be destroyed for no reason.
Definitely. Yeah. So I want to get into rite of passage, kind of the political situation in America as a whole. How long are you available for?
All the time in the world, man.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Because I have plenty more topics I'd like to touch on. Would it be cool if we were to take like a 5-minute break?
Yeah, I gotta get some more water. So yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, and we're back from the break. So I was just talking to Deloria a little bit about 4 people who were into art, thinking about doing it full time. So you say that you've had people contact you about becoming an artist and what it would take. What are your thoughts on it?
I had no choice but to become an artist. And it was actually something that I downplayed for a long time. My art teacher, his name was John LaBeouf. He was a pretty cool guy. He was a Cajun fella. And he took a lot of pride in being one of the lowest paid teachers in all of South Dakota. He wasn't so much a visual artist as he was a craftsman. So he'd make like guitar nuts out of bone. He'd make pipes and that sort of thing. So he was always working with drills and stuff. And now he's got Parkinson's, and it's really rough thinking about it, man. His hands they're gone. But that guy, he got me into an art program when I was young. I didn't know this. He sent my portfolio out, but very shortly before that, I got in a fight with one of my friends, and it was a real fight. Like it was throwing fists. We got into it, man. And once the guy came back from his smoke break, we pretended that nothing happened. And then 4 or 5 days later, I find out that I got into, I think it's USD, University of South Dakota. They have a pretty big art program. And, back then I was pretty, I mean, I guess it's a belief that I still have. And I thought if I went to school for artwork, then I wouldn't be making real art. Just imagine me being a melodramatic teenager saying that. I feel like that it's kind of worked itself out, but I wish I would have went to art school. I really wish I would have went to art school. But now that I'm actually in artwork, I'm not seeing a lot of great artists coming out of art school anymore. I don't know if that's if it really is conducive to networking is great. If I go back to school for art, it would be primarily for networking. It's hard to get into a gallery, especially where I'm located. The nearest art gallery is 3 hours west or 3 hours east, and you kind of have to have an in with them. Like you just can't show up and get in with it. But I think being an artist is easily one of the dumbest things you can do, unless you're really talented at it. I just don't think it's something you should be doing. There's a Bukowski poem called "So You Want to Be a Writer." I think every artist needs to read that. It's very short. There's a great line in there. He says something about. He basically says, if it's not burning inside your chest to get out, if you have to show your artwork to a friend or a parent or your girlfriend, like you shouldn't get into it. And one of his lines is like, the library shelves of the world have grown rigid or some shit like that. And it's just a great metaphor that he uses. But the advice is very practical. Don't be an artist. Don't be an art. I tell everyone who comes to me for help, like you're doing something very stupid. If you are 18, 19, and you have the choice to go to art school, I think you should go to a trade school because your life is going to be directly impacted by that decision. So in 5 years from now, you're going to be up to your eyes in debt and you're going to be angry at the system for fucking you over. But that was your decision. You made that decision to go to the art institute, and now you owe a lot of money. I've met a few of those in real life, and they always come out very bitter and angry. I'm like, you could have changed that. So when I hear people asking for help with that type of thing, I say trade school. If I could do it again, I would go to Job Corps. I have a friend who operates an excavator now, and he's making money hand over fist. He works an earth mover, and he's making so much goddamn money. I know friends who are contractors, who are electricians. If I could do it again, I would be a plumber, commercial plumber, not residential. It makes more sense getting your life figured out first. It's like psychotherapy, at least as Jung talked about it. Get your life in order. And when you're 30, 35, then you can go to psychotherapy. Then you can unpack all the stuff that went on in your life prior. But if you're pushing 40 and art is your only means of making money and you're not particularly good at it, man, like how much of that is on your shoulders? Probably all of it. I've seen people desperate for money, multiple occasions, and they're not all that talented either. That's the part that kills me. Is like I'll lend a helping hand to someone who is very talented, and I'll do my best. I can't promise much, but I'll do what I can. But there's a lot of people who think they're going to get commissioned, who think they're going to, that they're going to be like a rock star of the art world. I don't think that exists. I got propped up for my family. If I wasn't in artwork, if I wasn't making money through art, I would just be a deadbeat. And my family has a lot of deadbeats. So if I'm just around not doing anything, it's not the biggest deal. But that's a level of like privilege that a lot of people don't have. So when I was drinking from 18 to 25, my family put up with my nonsense and they didn't kick me out. So I'm very grateful for them. And even now, if I'm running low on cash or I'll pay someone back, but I still have that type of help. If you don't have that help, you are screwed. So for me, I'm very grateful that I can make artwork and I can make money from it, but it's a stupid thing, man. It's a very ill-advised career path. The only reason I do artwork now is because I have to. That's the only reason I do artwork is because I have to. If it were up to me, like I said, I would be a plumber. I would be a barber. I would try to become a forest ranger. I would have tried anything other than hoping that someone buys my stuff. it's just not a viable career path. This is the whole thing about being in art is high risk, high reward. And the reward is that I own my own business, and the price of my artwork increases over time. So after 4 or 5 years here, I could be making a little more than minimum wage, but I won't have to, sell my soul to do it. But that's 4 or 5 years wasted. I could have invested in something much more practical, and that would have benefited me in a much more immediate way. I'm not going to get health insurance from slinging artwork. You're not going to get health insurance from slinging artwork. You're not going to be able to rent a house or get a mortgage or even lease a new car just slinging artwork. Like, you have to. It's very rare to get to that level, and it's even harder getting past that level. Like, I want to get into art galleries soon. I wouldn't mind getting into the convention circuit, but just to have the capital needed to get into that is like, you have to be doing very well, or you have to have a lot of income from other people. Was that Oddities and Curiosities? They just released their dates for this year or next year, and those are in major cities, and those are a long ways away. And if I invested in going to one of these conventions, I could probably make my money back, and I could probably do some good networking. But just to have enough to do that is a monumental issue itself, and you kind of need to invest a lot of money into doing artwork. So I just don't think it's a good idea.
It kind of reminds me of that biblical quote: to those who have everything, everything will be given. To those who have nothing, everything will be taken. A little bit. The Matthew principle, I think, is what it's called, where it seems like success kind of builds on itself. But yeah, I definitely hope that eventually you're able to get on that convention circuit or get into the network for art. What are the best resources for someone interested in purchasing your artwork? Because I know you have the paintings, but then you also have like prints and whatnot as well.
Just follow me on Instagram. Like, I'm doing all my hustling through there. And then in my bio, I have all my stuff linked. I'm on
Okay.
big Cartel right now because Etsy is ridiculous, man. Etsy is taking a big chunk of sales these days. It's kind of a big issue. They're advertising for you whether you want it or not. And if anyone clicks on your shop through one of their ads, they're getting a cut. I've made like $1,200 sales and only gotten $900 from it. Like, they're getting wild with their stuff right now. So I use Big Cartel. So
Okay.
if anyone wants to get any of my stuff, it would be through Instagram.
Okay.
All my stuff's linked in my bio.
Okay. And your tag is Datura_AD?
Yeah, Datura.
Datura. Okay. That's how you pronounce it. Datura. Okay. Yeah, so speaking of psychedelics, have you ever tried Datura? Because I heard that's pretty intense.
No, I actually got the name from a novel. My cousin, I was hanging out with my cousin for a weekend out at his college, and he had a book there. And I'm not a social person at all, so I just read this book over the weekend. It was pretty fun, pretty all right. It was called Jesus Weed. It was about a fella who basically just travels the world and gets into all these hijinks. It's an okay book. And in the book, there's a story about him encountering a druid out in Europe, and the druid feeds him datura. I think he sends him to blow up a post office or some shit like that. Like, it's
Wow.
pretty intense. But that word just stood out to me, datura. I always figured it would be like a dope band name or something like that. Never made the band, but then used it for my art handle. That's been the thing. But yeah, datura is an interesting substance. I first learned about it from Terrence McKenna. He was saying that they found datura pods out in the southwestern tribal archaeological sites. So the idea is that before peyote was a thing, they've probably been inducing ordeal poisonings through the use of datura. Haven't read too much more into that, though.
Oh. Huh. Okay. And so going on to the subject of psychedelics, how essential would you say that certain psychedelics, whether it's mushrooms or LSD or peyote, how important are those to the concept of a rite of passage for young people?
You can either do, and this is all Terrence McKenna, ordeal poisons, datura, or in my case, it was K2, which is pretty rough, man. It was a pretty rough experience. Or ordeal, trial by ordeal is the second one. That's the Sundance. That's where you fast and dance and carry a buffalo skull that's skewered through your chest. Or some cultures they'll rip your hair out in clumps or scarify your whole body with glass. Or in Amazonian tribes, they'll put your hand in gloves that are just covered in bullet ants. The trial by ordeal is a big one. And I think psychedelics is easily the most available and probably the preferred route. But then you run into the issue of getting a real, like a real life transforming trip. You could probably look that up. Alex Shulgin, he was the guy who was given free reign to experiment with various chemicals, and he compiled everything together in a book. I want to say it's called Tekal, Tekhal. Anyways, over his many years of experimenting with these substances, he ended up with a scale, and the highest level on this scale, highest category is called, I think it's called a +4 experience. Are you near a computer?
Yeah.
Can you look that up real quick?
Yeah.
Look up Shulgin's scale +4 or
Shulgin.
just plus.
Okay. How do you spell Shulgin? Scale.
SHULGIN.
Okay.
And then scale.
LGIN. There we go. Shulgin scale +4. You said.
Yeah, just look it up and look at the fourth category.
Okay, so I see. Here's a Wikipedia article. Shulgin rating scale. All right, so +4 is defined as a rare and precious transcendental state, which has been called a peak experience, a religious experience, divine transformation, state of samadhi, which is a Hindu term, and many other names in other cultures. It is not connected to the +1, +2, and +3 of measuring of a drug's intensity. It is a state of bliss, a participation mystique, a connectedness with both the interior and exterior universes, which has come after the ingestion of a psychedelic drug, which is not necessarily repeatable with subsequent ingestion of the same drug. If a drug were ever to be discovered which would consistently produce a +4 in all human beings, it is conceivable that it would signal the ultimate evolution and perhaps the end of the human experiment. That's a quote by Alex Shulgin in Pikal, his book, which I guess is spelled Pihkal. If anyone listening is interested in that, that's what you were looking for, that description?
Yeah. Huh. So I feel like psychedelics are, I held my psychedelic experience very close to my chest because it was a very important time in my life and it made for a great story. But as I get older, I'm not so I guess faithful in the idea of me ever actually publishing any of my writings in a way that would bring monetary benefit. But it was a life-changing experience for me. That's not usual. Most people I know who've taken these types of drugs, it's always been a party setting. Very rarely do they have these big, grandiose, psychedelic inward journeys. And I think a big part of that is the lack of infrastructure built up around these things. Because, most time there's no infrastructure. There's no real rites. There's no ritual elder. There's no ritual in general outside of some dumbass hippie making you go om before you take a hit of smoke. I wonder if these peak experiences would happen more if there was like a new class of ritual elders. But that's an open-ended question.
Yeah,
probably doesn't have any answers.
So if you don't mind me asking, does your tribe use peyote at all?
They do. I'm not so much into the underground. It's not really underground. It's just most people aren't traditional anymore. and I didn't grow up traditional. My aunt, her husband, her kids, they're very much in that sweat lodge stuff. It was just never an option where and when I grew up. You know, my family, they all became Christians, so we kind of got the short end of the stick. I would have loved to experience that type of stuff, and you know, it's not a possibility. It's still a possibility. It's just something I've never really gone too far. It's not something I pursued. But yeah, no, I the tribe does actively practice that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, my brother was dating a native girl. So we have a res in our town from the Timuak tribe, and I got to do a sweat with her dad. No peyote, but the sweat was super cool. It's on my bucket list to build some sort of wigwam in my backyard just to be able to do that. So it was definitely like a very cathartic experience, at least when I did it. I did notice in your paper you said that it seemed like you were a little skeptical of some of the tribal traditions. Is that fair to say?
Well, I mean, I think money just corrupts everything. I feel like money corrupts things. You know, I've known of a few medicine men types who kind of just put on a show. There's certain get-togethers that have a lot more foreigners than you would expect. My uncle, he was never traditional. He's not well versed in the you know, the more occult going ons, but he used these get-togethers as a way to get money. You know, it wasn't really a spiritual thing for him. It was just a way to meet women and to get free drugs and shit. Like, it was never, you know, to the people that I know, it was never a serious practice. It seemed to be more of a show for other people. So I'm not particularly drawn to it myself. And for me, I got the experiences through good old fashioned suffering and dreams, and those were huge. I mean, those were just as important as the mushroom experience. So, yeah, you know, I'm sure that's an avenue that a lot of people should take, but for me, it's just not something that's on the bucket list necessarily. I was hanging out with a journalist from a magazine called 21. His name was Camille, and he said when he was interviewing the I think she was the head of the local paper. He said what he encountered was dogmatism. Basically, it was you know, the people he talked to who were involved in the Native American stuff, like they were just as closed-minded as the Christians were. So it didn't necessarily open them up to be more accepting individuals. They just gave them a new sports team to rally behind. So you know, I just don't think highly of it now. Maybe when I'm older, you know, I would gladly trip ayahuasca in a jungle somewhere that is foreign to me. But yeah, it's just not all that interesting to me.
Okay. Do you think that there's any value in hanging on to, like, say, the powwows or the sweat sessions? You had a quote somewhere. I can't find it, but something about how it's not necessarily experienced fully. Those traditions were kind of lost in a way.
You know, for me, powwow music was never something that spoke to my soul. Our tribe's radio station's owned by the local Catholic church, so every night the program would end at 9:45, and it would do the Hail Mary, full of grace thing. I never questioned that. That was just a part of it. In a certain manner, powwow music or native music, it never spoke to me. I've never been drawn to it. I've never thought of it as powerful or anything. To me, it just sounds like a collection of heyas, and that's not a unique. It's not a unique takeaway. A lot of people feel that way. I feel like the mechanisms behind what that stuff represents is still very much alive and can be experienced by us just through different avenues. But that stuff specifically, I don't think it doesn't grab people the way it should. Powwows these days, they're not sacred or nothing like that. If you go at powwow, it's mostly a place for vendors to sell fry bread and Indian tacos, or to sell quilts, or for Christians to hand out notebooks and propaganda. It's not really, it doesn't live the same way that it used to. That was one of my buddy's main criticism of it. He used to work the powwow trail, so he would sell Indian tacos in like the neighboring states. That was just what he did for money over the summers. Made a lot of cash, but his whole thing was the commercialization of it. Now, I don't think the Sundances themselves are commercialized like that, but powwows are definitely at that level. And the fancy dancers that I've known, they don't do it for any traditional reasons. They do it for money. These are competitions. There's a financial incentive to do it. So I think a lot of that stuff is for show. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong, but that's how I view it.
You don't mind me asking, have you received any pushback from any people in your community for the views that you have on certain topics?
For me, when I talk about the reservation, I talk about what I experienced. And a lot of what I experienced was the addiction aspect and a lot of the self-destructive aspect. And the pushback I get most commonly is not from people who live around here, but just Native Americans online and stuff. They absolutely refuse to talk about the darker stuff that happens out here. I think they want to give a more sanitized view of these places. And when you talk about addiction or violence or, abuse or whatever it is, like these people rush in and try to give off this appearance that it's not a hellhole to a certain degree. So yeah, there is pushback, man. And I don't know what that is. I really don't know. I think we've been characterized as drunks and what have you for so long that people just want that stereotype to not exist. But unfortunately, stereotypes, they exist for a reason.
So I guess I would like to talk a little bit more about the U.S. in general. We've had a really weird year with COVID and kind of a tense election. So you said that you're a bit against identity politics. You feel like it's not really conducive. It's kind of interesting. Peter Turchin I think he's a Russian professor who kind of goes into looking at history from kind of a statistical perspective. And he says that a nation or an empire usually only exists about 250 years. And what's interesting is we are coming to almost exactly 250 years from the conception of the United States in only 5 years. So what are your kind of thoughts on the tension that we see today between the right and the left and how things might be progressing?
There's a couple ideas that I really like. I don't know what the hell they're called. Zidicum nostrum, I think, is what is the Judaic phrase. The Judaic belief was that at any given time there are 31 righteous people, and if any of these 31 righteous people were to disappear, then the world itself would end. But in that same vein, Arnold J. Toynbee, who is this historian, he had his heyday back in like the 60s or 70s, but he ended up having a mystic experience, and when that happened, he ended up going back to Catholicism. And when that happened, people just kind of wrote him off because, mystic experiences back then isn't really a good look for someone. His idea was similar in that societies need the voice of the creative minority. Like if a society becomes stagnant and the creative minority is no longer able to speak to the broader population, then I think how this goes is the avenues for self-transformation that can keep the society moving disappear. I feel like identity politics has a possibility of stifling that creative minority. I think that's a bad look. Now, I don't for a second think the American experience is over. I don't know if that's just optimism or me lying to myself. I highly doubt that this thing is going to turn into some great descent. I don't know what that is. I just don't believe it. I think what needs to happen, though, is the creative minority needs to speak again. And I feel like there is a real sense of stagnation. There's a real sense of stagnation. Take the Democratic Party, taking Biden as the president-elect, when someone like Sanders was bringing actual reforms that could benefit the American populace. Well, now it's just the crown being handed back to another dynasty that just wrapped up not too long ago. I think that there needs to be a birth or a rebirth of something that can be substantial, that has power. I think that's possible. I want that to be possible. But we would need that creative minority. We would need these prophet figures. You would need people who could adequately handle the voices and concerns of the mass and do it in such a vibrant and powerful way that more people listen. But I don't really have too much pessimism when it comes to where we're going. For me, I'm seeing the increasing violence and the protesting as more of a sign of the importance of rites of passage. I think the loss of rites of passage is just gonna come up for a long time until we can harness that stuff in a mutually beneficial way. So when I see the Black Bloc protesters, I see regalia. I see ritual regalia. You know, I see people on pilgrimage, and they're on a pilgrimage to not cause mass change, but instead to initiate themselves into a brotherhood through violence. And that's a tale as old as time. It happens in all cultures. And now we're going to see that more and more on the right. We're going to see more and more of that in the Proud Boy thing. And the interesting part about the Proud Boy thing is they're making it very explicit. I mean, they're dorky and their initiation rites are funny, but they're trying to speak to that same level of brotherhood that would normally exist in a culture anyways, if we weren't fucked over by modernity. So I don't personally see it as a pre-Nazi Germany. I don't see our current state at that level. It's possible. What's so interesting right now about America and the technological advancements that we have is that if a dictator were to arise, the surveillance state, like that stuff has been implemented over the last 20, 30 years. If a cunning and malicious enough of a medicine man would show up in the same way that Hitler was a medicine man, the same way that they carry all these the voices of the many, the way they amplify it. Like if someone wanted to come in and do that, like it's getting more and more of a possibility. So I feel like if there is any sense of urgency, it would be for the creation of a political party that would take these very pressing concerns into consideration and to use these concerns to create a unified whole that could stand up against what we have as far as the Republican and the Democratic parties go. But for me, there's no pessimism. You know, like I was born on the reservation, and I was born in a bad place in a bad time. And I never once looked back at all this and thought that, this was the fault of the white man or this is colonization or anything. Like all I ever looked at was what we have to do now to make things better. So for me, I look at America politically in the same light. You know, we have to move forward somehow, and it has to be done in a certain way. And I'm just hopeful. I guess I am. I'm optimistic when it comes to this stuff.
And so you see our way forward through this kind of rebirth, through the resurrection of these rites of passages to get us away from these building forces. Because in a lot of ways, to me, it seems kind of tense. You know, the violence is increasing on both sides, the right and the left. So to me, it does seem like if something doesn't change soon, then, we're going to see bad things potentially in the U.S. But still, you're hopeful ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I don't have that end of the world disposition. When I was young and more influenced by Christianity, I think I might have had it. But to think that the world is going to end in our time, say as a Christian, that the day of judgment and God's going to come calling just because we're alive during it, I would call that silly. Likewise, now, if I had the nihilism of anti-consumerist extinction and the budding presence of a dictatorship, yeah, I would also call that silly. But it could be denial. I'm not going to say it's not denial. I mean, I would be worried if a charismatic figure started to show up. I'm not so fearful of Trump, but I am interested in how many people have gravitated towards a geriatric reality TV star. Like for me, that's just weird. I would be worried if there was another figure like him who could play all the same roles but do so in a more cohesive manner. But I'm not really aware of any peripheral figures like that just yet.
You talk about the new growth of Puritanism in the United States. Is that kind of related to what you say with the right and the left kind of going through their brotherhood, the Black Bloc and the Proud Boys? Is this Puritanism kind of expressed in these groups sort of becoming more dogmatic?
I can't speak for the left or for the right. I can't speak for conservative. I don't know what the hell is going on there. They're just not my people. But they still have the remnants of the old Puritanism. So I don't know. You don't see the sacrificial acts that happen on the left, though, as far as the right's concerned. I think that's the most malevolent part of everything is the cancel culture aspect. And everyone says that cancel culture doesn't exist because all these people are still out making money, but it happens on a microcosm. There are people now who curate who they interact with, and they do it with reckless, prejudice. Like they make sure no one speaks out of line, and when someone fucks up, they make sure there's no concept of forgiveness for these people. And I feel like that does pushes people either towards the more left leaning, you have to toe this line and you have to believe what we believe or you're out. And on the other end, it sends people either into indifference, which is pretty rough, because indifference does fuck things over in its own way. But then you have the possibility of bigotry and actual racism being the end product of that sort of sacrificial act. To me, that's just it's a rebirth of religion. The original sin's whiteness. There is a dogmatic, there's a gospel coming soon with books like White Fragility, which, White Fragility was criticized to shit even by left-leaning people. So I'm glad that that's not the dominant worldview, but they're still trying to sneak in that critical race theory thing. Black Lives Matter imploding, like that's gonna be a thing. There's gonna be grifters. It's gonna keep being a mess. But the puritanical aspect, man, there has to be documentation of this. There has to be people who are already formulating these in bullet points that I can't off the top of my head. But it's there. It's a new religion.
Yeah.
It's a new religion. It's the old Christian PMRC shit, but it kind of has the dominant voice in culture at the moment, which is a shame. I hate seeing that as a fan of comedy personally. I think we should be allowed to fuck up and say things we're not supposed to say. I believe that 100%. But then you have people attempting to control humor, people attempting to control just entertainment. I feel like it's polarizing both directions, and that's it's not a good look for culture at large. But my belief is still, and the more I talk about it, the more I convince myself, like, there has to be a legitimate progressive party. There has to be a middle way. It can't keep pulling itself apart. I don't think it can keep pulling it. Like there's gonna be a void, and it has to be filled eventually.
So I guess on a lighter note, who are some comedians that you're following right now?
I'm big into the East Coast Coast comedy scene. I can't really fuck with the West Coast. The West Coast, they're filled with people who are more interested in getting sitcoms. They're more interested in, these people are more interested in making money. Like, you go to Hollywood to make money. I feel like the East Coast, it's more what comedy's supposed to be. It's more silly. It's more edgy. It's just, for me, more entertaining. You don't find that with like Joe Rogan's clique. You don't find that with Tom Segura's people anymore. Eric Griffin, Theo. I just don't really care for the West Coast anymore. Like what New York's pumping out, what the Pittsburgh, Philly, what Philly and New York are doing right now. I think that's great. So specific comedians, man. Colm Tyrell is someone that I really like seeing. He's not that big at all, but that guy is just a naturally funny dude. Colm Tyrell is hilarious.
Said Colin, Collin.
Colm.
How do you spell that?
Colum, Colum, Tyrell.
Okay.
Big fan of Big J Okerson. What his whole crew's doing with Gas Digital. I'm a big fan of that, man. It's just good old fashioned, edgy, mostly silly humor. So Legion of Skanks, real ass podcast. No Need for Apologies is a good podcast with some solid comedians. Derek Gaines and Monroe Martin. I think anyone in that Gas Digital camp, like it's edgy, but it's still funny, and it's not pretentious. Not too pretentious. I hate pretension now. I hate hearing comics talk about the craft. I'm just kind of over stand-up comedy in general. I think podcasting ruins stand-up comedy. There's not a lot of solid material. You know, one of the greatest stand-up albums of the last 5 years was Adam Sandler's recent one, which I even feel weird saying. I forgot what it's called, but it was a Netflix one, and it's just an hour straight of this guy doing silly humor. Like everyone is using comedy as a way to preach, and a lot of people aren't doing it to be funny. And Sandler just rolls in and does silly jokes, silly songs for a whole hour. Like that shit had me rolling. Mark Normand, that's another great one.
Yeah.
Like Mark Normand just does jokes, set up punchline for like a whole special. Like that's very rare, man. Yeah, for me it's just East Coast.
East Coast.
If you're gonna find something funny, it's probably gonna be on the East Coast.
Are there any podcasts that you follow? I like Nick Mullins.
Yeah.
So yeah.
For heavy rotation for me right now, Legion of Skanks comes out weekly. Big fan of that.
Okay.
Real Ass Podcast comes out 3 times a week. Listen live every day. Who else? No Disrespect, Mike Vecchione. It's not top tier or anything, but it's fine. Zach Amico's Midnight Horror Show. It's Midnight Spook Show. It's just comics riffing over horror movies. Who else is there? Big fan of Oral Presentations. That's a Philly comic named Chris Wood. He's doing his thing. It is what it sounds. It's just a Philly guy going out, learning about a new topic and being funny. Man Shane's Secret Podcast. Like I still listen to that even though he got canceled. I actually painted Shane Gillis like a solid 7 months before everything went down, which is pretty dope. Nice. Who else is that? That guy follows me. A lot of those Philly guys follow me on Instagram, which is pretty dope. Dad Meets a new one. Dad Meets solid. That's just 2 older dudes. Good energy. I like some positive stuff in my entertainment these days. Who else? That's most of them. That's comedy, but like for like Jungian stuff, big fan of Shrink Rap Radio. If you're not listening to that, you should be. That's it's a mental health podcast, but it has a heavy Jungian bend. A lot of the stuff I know about, modern psychotherapy and psychology in general, it's just secondhand from that show. Big fan of the Chicago Jung Institute. Like they have a store there. You could purchase hours and hours of lectures through them. Big fan of them. Speaking of Jung, that's fine. Very infrequent episodes, but it's pretty solid. What else? That's pretty much it. So I have my comedy, and then I have my Jungian stuff for the most part.
That's awesome. Yeah, it seems like for some reason in our zeitgeist, 2 big things are comedy and psychedelics. Seems like more and more attention's being put to both those things. Seems like a lot of comics are talking about psychedelics. And I think just this lockdown is kind of forcing everyone to, no one really is able to get out. So, they're watching more comedy and podcasts just because it kind of helps provide socialization and that sort of thing. Is there anything else that you want to talk about as sort of a closing note?
Closing notes. I got nothing, man. The next time, we should do it next time.
Yeah.
And
sure.
I do want to talk about these dreams. Mostly I want to talk about the dreams in detail. And I teased the mushroom trip, but I kind of want to include that in there too.
Yeah.
That's its own thing.
Yeah, I remember
definitely do a follow-up.
Yeah, for sure. I remember reading your Reddit post about some of your dreams. It was some trippy stuff, man. Yeah, but I think I think that's a good idea, though. We'll save that for next time. Thanks for taking the time to talk. Yeah, it's definitely good to hear your voice get out. You have some really interesting stuff. If this ends up being like an actual podcast, because you're my very first guest, I do hope to, talk to people kind of like you who are just like super idiosyncratic. Maybe it's the fact that, you're well individuated from a Jungian perspective, but I'm just interested in finding people who aren't necessarily in the mainstream, but who have interesting stories like yours. So if this does become a thing, heck, you could become like a recurring guest or something. That'd be really cool.
That'd be great. Yeah, and just let me know when this thing goes out. I could probably get a couple 100 eyes on it, hopefully.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome, man. It'll probably take me, maybe a week or so to do some editing. I gotta find some, make intro music and that sort of thing. got to get like, your art and then the different things that we talked about kind of overlaid onto the video so people have something to look at. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time to talk to me. This is all kind of starting on a whim, but it's been something that's kind of been building for a while. I've been thinking of, the concept of the internet and connecting to different people. I'm just a guy, but I figured this would be cool to get different voices out. So who knows? I guess we'll see. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time to talk. Again, Deloria Black Wolf or Datura, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Datura_AD. You can find him on Instagram. You can buy his prints. You can buy his art. You also have a blog or a place where you write.
Yeah, there's actually a collection of stories on the Instagram page. It's like if anyone wants to read this stuff, like I don't really talk about the actual drinking years, but I write about them. I should do it more often, but it's just not top priority anymore. Painting's top priority, but there's a collection. There's a collection out there.
Okay. Yeah, you have some really interesting writings from like your time drinking and before. I guess you kind of got onto the individuation path. So I definitely recommend checking out his writing as well. You have a very introspective, I would say, perspective. You have like kind of I like your writing style because it's there's not a lot of like embellishment or something. It's very like straightforward, but it's very like grounded in my opinion. So there's something like refreshing about that.
I write like I talk.
Yeah, and I think that quote you have, I always dug holding down the low end. I feel like that's pretty fitting. You seem like a super grounded person. I always like to see what you have coming out. And yeah, dude, I do hope that we can collaborate in the future.
All right, man. Sounds good.
Awesome.